Hi, my name is Sam and I'm a Howie with the Pure Arts faculty. If you can notice a strange accent in my voice, it's because I'm Portuguese. Like you, I study in a university in Portugal, where I graduated in 2016. This year I married my lovely wife Emily, who, like you, also studied at Sydney Uni. I wonder why you chose to watch this elective. Perhaps you are someone who feels like rest is something unproductive, or perhaps you struggle with finding rest when there's so much going on with study and work and family and friends and life admin, church. Or perhaps you've been on holidays in these last few weeks, but you don't feel rested. If this is you, chances are you need to unlearn rest. Now, why may I not be getting rest right? I think there's two problems. One is that often I think I know what rest is, but chances are I don't, and so I get rest wrong. As a result, I may not be giving rest the value it should have in my life, or perhaps I do, but I can't rest properly because I don't know how to rest properly. And that's more of a head knowledge problem. The second problem is more of a heart problem. I think I know what rest is, or I even know what rest is, but then I don't do it. My actions don't align with my knowledge. For example, I think that in order to rest, I need to go to bed at 10 p.m. But then I stay awake watching Netflix, watching my friend's Instagram. Or perhaps I think that in order to rest, I need to take some time out on a Saturday morning to read the Bible, pray. But then I end up deciding doing other things. You see, my actions don't always align with my thoughts. And because there's a heart problem, unlearning rest is something hard. It's not just about unlearning a concept, but it's also about considering changing a behavior. You may have noticed that the word unlearn is actually part of the slogan for Sydney Uni this year. In their webpage, they have the Cambridge Dictionary's definition for the term unlearn, and it reads like this: unlearn is to make an effort to forget your usual way of doing something so that you can learn a new and sometimes better way. So before we begin this elective, the question you need to ask yourself is this: am I willing to unlearn rest? Am I willing to consider making an effort to forget my usual way of doing rest so that I can learn a new way to rest? Because the effectiveness of this seminar is going to depend on your answer to this question. Whatever struggle you may have with rest is not going to be solved by simply hearing what I have to say. Now, on to the issue of rest. I want to begin by asking you something. When you say, I need to rest, what is often the reason behind it? Think about it. Take a pen and a piece of paper and write down your answer. I don't know about you, but often when I think that I need to rest, it's because I feel tired. I am tired, and rest is the means to recover from my tiredness. Rest is a response or a consequence of my fatigue. I wonder if your answer was similar to me. You feel that you need to rest because you're tired. But what does the Bible say about rest, and why do we need to rest? If you read Genesis 1-3, you may have noticed that God rested. In fact, God's rest is inserted in the account of creation. in the 7 days of his creation. In Genesis 1, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now the earth was formless and empty. Then the author goes on to explain the works of God's creation on the earth during 7 days. On the first day, God creates the light and separates the light from darkness. To the light he called day, to the darkness he called night. On the second day, he separates the sky from the earth. On the third day, he separated the land from the water and created all the vegetation, plants and trees. On the fourth day, God creates the sun and the moon and the stars. On the fifth, he created the animals. And on the sixth day, he created humanity. Now, we often like to spend lots of time on day 6 because it is where humanity is created and where we find the earliest knowledge we have about humankind. Now, chapter 1 may end on day 6, but the account of God's creation doesn't. There's still a 7th day, and this is what we read in chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, these couple of verses are very important, and we'll be coming back to these across this elective. The first thing we can see here is that rest is part of God's creation. God rested on the 7th day. Rest is not something that God said later. No, it was right there in the beginning. God made rest to be a part of the design of his creation. So this is the point 1 on your run sheets. Rest is God's design for his creation. As important as the light, the land and the water, the sun, moon, stars, as important as all of those things are, so it is rest. Because it is part of God's design for his creation. This rest as God's design can also be seen in the cycles of creation in Genesis 1. One of these cycles is marked with the repetition of the sentence, "There was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day." Every day God works, but then there's evening and there's morning. There's rest. There's also there's a daily rest, and there's also a weekly rest. As we saw, God worked 6 days and he rested on the 7th. On the 4th day, in chapter 1, verses 14, God also creates the seasons. And with the seasons comes cycles of both work and rest. The spring is the time to sow, the summer is the time to reap, and the winter is the time to rest, to eat what was harvested in previous seasons. Now, we live in a society where these cycles don't really affect us. We don't really feel the need to go to bed when it gets dark because we have powerful lights in our homes. I go to the supermarket and I can find oranges there no matter the season of the year. But as good as these things are, they can easily influence us to forget that they're cycles that God created as part of his orderly design for his creation. As important as drinking water is for me, so it is rest. The consequences of not drinking water may be different from the consequences of not resting, but they are both part of God's design for us. So rest is not something that we should take lightly. It is part of God's design for humanity. So why do I need to rest? Because I feel tired? No, because it is God's design for us. No, I'm not saying we shouldn't rest when we're feeling tired. What I'm saying is that rest is beyond my tiredness. It should be done regardless of my state of energy. I should look for rest because that's the way God designed me. Now, that brings me to my second point. Why did God rest in the first place? Did God get tired? This is what the prophet Isaiah said about God. Don't you know? Haven't you heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He doesn't grow tired or weary. His understanding is beyond human reach. So God doesn't get tired, yet he rested. Have a look again at Genesis 2, 1 and 3 and try to see what is the reason God rested. One of the reasons is given to us here in verse 2. Read with me. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. God rested from all his work. I don't know Hebrew, but those who know say that the word rest here can be translated as ceasing. God ceased from his work. He stopped. God worked for 6 days and God ceased from all his work on the seventh day. So God rested to cease from his work. And that's the second point on your handouts. Rest is to cease from work. Just as important as the work that brought about everything to life, so was the ceasing from it. But ceasing is so hard, isn't it? We don't like to stop. We've been taught that stopping is for the weak. You may remember the TV show Pokemon. Perhaps you even play the games. The lyrics for the first theme song on the first season goes like this. I want to be the very best, like no one ever was. To catch them is my real test. To train them is my cause. To be the very best. This is what we've been taught by the TV, from our parents at our school, from the people around us, from our heroes. To just catch some Pokemons is not enough. I want to catch them all. And how can I catch all the Pokemons if I stop? How can I get a good ATAR if I stop? How can I get to the top of my class if I cease? How can I get a good job in the future if I take time now to rest? I want to be the very best. Deep down, don't we think like that? I mean, why did you come to senior uni in the first place? Why not put another uni as a first preference? Everybody wants to be a master. Everybody wants to show their skills. Everybody wants to get there faster, make their way to the top of the hills. Well, I guess this could be a note to the uni student mind, or more broadly, a hymn to the human heart. But it's actually from another of the Pokemon songs. But it does represent our hearts, doesn't it? We want to be a master. We want to get to the top of the hill, and rest threatens this way of life. It threatens our independence and desire to be the best. And so rest is hard. To cease from work, in a way, is to become dependent. Ultimately, it means to let go from our desire of being in control of our lives and letting God to run his world without us. What are some of the things in your life that could be threatened by the perspective of rest? Think about that. Now, so far we've seen that rest is God's design for us. We also saw that rest is to cease from work. In Genesis 2, God tells us something else about rest. Read again with me, Genesis 2 and 3. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. God made the seventh day holy. Now, holy means separate or set apart. And in the scriptures, often this has a connotation of something being dedicated and distinct to God. The day of rest was to be dedicated to God. Mankind would have 6 days for themselves, but then on the 7th day, they would cease from their work and remember God. And that's the third point on your handouts. Rest is to remember God. Now, based on the principle that God rests on the 7th day, later on he gives his people, the Israelites, a commandment to rest on the Sabbath. You can check that out in Exodus 20, verse 8. And when the people of God were ready to enter the promised land, Moses reminds them of this commandment. And this is what he says: "Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all the work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." You see there in verse 15, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Remember God and what he did. That was the purpose behind the principle of rest. The Israelites were to cease from their work and remember God, how he rescued them from slavery. Now, in a sense, is a picture of rescue. In a sense, this picture of rescue was not but a shadow of what Christ did for us in the cross. He rescued us from the slavery of sin. This is what Paul says in the letter to the Colossians. "So don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days, or new moon ceremonies, or Sabbaths. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come. And Christ himself is that reality." The Sabbath rest is the shadow of the reality yet to come. What is that reality? Well, the passage tells us. It is Christ. The rule to rest on the Sabbath was just a shadow of the reality. There is Christ. And so the purpose of the Sabbath rest is to remember Christ. But you see here in Colossians, Christ is already the reality, but in a sense that reality is something yet to come. How is that so? This is what the author of Hebrews says. "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his." Just as God rested on the 7th day, so one day we will also rest from our works. The rest we can achieve here on earth is not but a small taste of the day there is to come. The day when God's people will enter God's rest and fully rest from their works. The reality yet to come that Paul talks in Colossians is when Christ will return and we will dwell with him. It's this day. Rest is a time to remember God. Remember what he did in Christ, what he does through Christ, and what is yet to come with Christ. So what is rest? Rest is God's design for humanity to cease from work and remember him. Rest is God's design for humanity to cease from work and remember him. So what does that mean? Do I need to always be actively and intentionally remembering God? And do I need to set a day off every week to rest and use that time to do things like read the Bible and pray? I I haven't even started resting and I'm already tired just to think about rest. Well, the short answer is no. Firstly, Genesis 1 and 2 tells us what God did. It is not a rule, it's more like a principle. We were made in God's image, and like God, we should work and we should rest. Secondly, not all rest was a Sabbath rest. As we saw before, besides the seventh day, God also designed evenings and seasons for people to cease work. And these days were not necessarily holidays. Thirdly, we need to understand the purpose of rest. Now, the Jews had to keep the Sabbath holy as part of God's commandment, but they often misinterpret the purpose behind the commandment. And so they began making rules on what people could and couldn't do. Now, Jesus approaches the Sabbath rest in a different way. In Mark 2:27 and 28, he said, "The Sabbath was made for the man, not the man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Jesus goes into the essence of the commandment to keep the Sabbath, and he says, actually, the Sabbath is not about rules of what a person can and cannot do. God created the Sabbath rest for humanity, for the good of men. And so Jesus sometimes he worked on the Sabbath. He harvested to eat, he healed people, he taught. So no, I'm not saying that we need to necessarily have a day off every week to cease and remember God. But we must not forget as well that even though Jesus sometimes worked on the Sabbath, he also took regular time to cease from work and to pray. Luke 5:15 and 16, yet the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness. But Jesus often withdrew to a lonely place and prayed. Mark 1:35-36, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Mark 6:31, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So even though the Sabbath rest is not a rule, the principle to rest is still there. It is still important to take some time regularly to cease from work and remember God, just like Jesus did. After all, that's how God designed us. And lastly, the idea of remembering God is not as much about doing things. It's not about having to read the Bible and pray and write a journal. There's an Asian pastor called Mark Shua that shares this helpful idea that rest is more about being rather than doing. Remembering God should stem from a desire of wanting to be with God, not to do things. What does that look like? Well, it may be that you decide to go on a walk and thank God for what is around you. Or perhaps you wake up in the morning and feel like singing songs to Him in adoration. Perhaps your desire is to hear God's voice, and so you read the Bible in a Saturday Arvo, or you want to spend some time with Him alone and you go out to a quiet place and pray. But these things should come from a desire of wanting to be with God, rather than a set of things that I need to do. The prophet Isaiah helpfully puts it in this way. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going on your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you'll find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. What a beautiful picture of rest. If you call the Sabbath a delight, then you'll find your joy in the Lord. To remember God is to delight in Him. What are some of the ways you could delight in God? To remember Him, to be with Him. Think about that. Now, another question you may have is, how can I rest when I am so busy all the time and there's so many competing priorities in my life? Well, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And so what I'm going to share is not a rule, but more of an advice that I once got myself from a wise man. We live in a society that is highly driven by time, schedules, and agendas. I am waking up at 8 a.m. and I have a lecture from 9 to 11, then I need to make a run to the post office and buy some lunch on the way there because at 1 p.m. I need to be in the city for a doctor appointment. Is this type of hectic schedule familiar to you? If so, chances are that even if you're willing to cease from your work, you may feel like you cannot do it. So my suggestion to you is that you make rest as part of your schedule. Find a time in your week to rest and put it there in your calendar or diary. That way, if someone comes to you and tries to set something during that time, you can say, "I'm sorry, I'm already busy." Now, the trick is to know how important is that time in your diary so that you don't keep rescheduling it for other things, neither you become so legalistic that if your dog is dying, you can't save him because you're busy. My suggestion is that you see it more like a date. In fact, it is like a date. You are going on a date with God. You are taking time to cease from your work, to remember Him, to delight in Him. So, in Christ we have freedom. Freedom to decide on how we use our time. There's time to travel, there's time to watch movies, there's time to be with family, and there's time to work. But as you think about your day, about your week, your year, you should make sure that you have some time where you cease from work and remember God. That's what Jesus did, and that's the way God designed us.